In 1989, what started as a normal boat trip turned, in a single moment, into the beginning of a nightmare. A group of tourists was cruising over calm, peaceful waters, that kind of calm that feels too perfect, like it's hiding something underneath. And then, out of nowhere, something floated to the surface, a strange object, something that didn't look like wreckage, and definitely not like random ocean debris. The yacht approached slowly, meter by meter, and with every bit of distance closed, the truth started showing its teeth. It was the body of a woman, a corpse the sea had spit back out, almost as if it could no longer hold the secret. The police were called immediately, but the real shock wasn't that first body. It was what they found next. In the same patch of water, there were 3 more bodies, 3 more women. Each one had her feet tightly bound with strong ropes connected to solid concrete blocks, a method that left no room for doubt. Someone wanted those bodies to stay at the bottom forever. But the sea betrayed the killer and exposed everything. That's where the investigation began. A meticulous crime, a smart, calculated killer, and clues that seemed impossible to trace. But what no one expected was that the way this killer was uncovered would be even stranger than the crime itself, a story that opens door after door, leading to twists no one could have imagined. Now let's dive in and enjoy the thrilling details that make this story. The events of this story go back to 1989 in the state of Florida, a place that pulls in tourists all year long, especially around its wide, beautiful coastline. And in one of those coastal areas, specifically in the city of Tampa, a group of tourists was out on a small yacht, enjoying the weather and the calm water. Everything felt peaceful, perfect, until it all flipped in an instant. From a short distance away, something strange caught their eye, an object floating on the surface. As the yacht moved closer, its shape started to become clearer, until the horrifying truth finally revealed itself. It was the body of a woman, lying lifeless on top of the water. They immediately called the Coast Guard. The body was only about 3 kilometers from the shore, so rescue teams arrived quickly and pulled it out. But the moment they examined it, the discoveries were even more brutal. There was duct tape across the woman's mouth. Her hands were tied with a yellow rope, and her feet were bound to a heavy concrete block. It was obvious someone had restrained her on purpose and thrown her into the water while she was still alive. According to procedure in cases like this, the Coast Guard began searching the surrounding area for any additional evidence. But what they found within just a few hours was far beyond anything they expected. They discovered 2 more bodies, both women, both with the same horrific details. Duct tape over the mouth, hands tied, feet bound to concrete blocks, and the ocean trying and failing to hide a crime much bigger than it could ever conceal. This wasn't one victim, it was 3. Investigators immediately noticed that the lower part of all 3 victims' clothing had been removed, hinting at an assault before they were drowned. But the most terrifying detail was in their lungs. They were filled with water, which meant they drowned while they were still alive. The killer didn't just murder them. He wanted them to feel every second of the suffocation, and the concrete tied to their feet was just the tool to drag them straight to the bottom. And the cruelest part, their eyes weren't covered. That meant each one of them watched the others being thrown into the water, as if the killer wanted to torture them mentally before destroying their bodies. Some might wonder, How did the bodies float back to the surface if concrete was tied to them? The answer is simple biology. After death, the body begins to decompose, producing gases that fill it from the inside, turning it into something like a balloon, and eventually forcing it upward. At that point, even the weight of the concrete couldn't keep them down. But while they were alive, that weight was more than enough to drag them straight to the depths. Investigators also noticed a clear resemblance between the three victims. Their ages, their features, everything pointed to one possibility. They were related, most likely a mother and her two daughters. One victim was older, while the other two looked like teenagers, but none of them had any ID or documents on their bodies or clothing. The police were starting from almost zero. With no other way to identify them, the police went public, announcing that they had found the body of an adult woman along with two teenage girls, believed to be her daughters. They didn't release photos since the bodies were already decomposing. They simply asked the public for any information. It didn't take long before a phone call came in, a call that would change the entire direction of the investigation. The manager of the Days Inn Hotel contacted the police. He told them that a woman and her two daughters had checked in a few days earlier and then suddenly disappeared. The cleaning staff entered the room and found all their belongings still there, untouched, as if the three of them had just vanished into thin air. And some might wonder why no one had reported them missing earlier. But it's important to remember, this was 1989. Cell phones did exist, technically, but they were rare, extremely expensive, and their networks were practically useless. Communication simply wasn't fast or easy. Police rushed to the hotel, and that's where they finally found the victims' identities. The mother, Joan Rogers. The older daughter, Michelle, 17 years old. The younger daughter, Christ, 14 years old. Just like that, the mystery of who they were was solved. But the bigger, darker, far more terrifying question remained. Who was the monster that lured a mother and her two daughters and led them into one of the most horrific scenes Florida had ever witnessed? After the police identified the victims, they discovered something important. These three weren't Florida residents at all. They had come all the way from Ohio, more than 1,500 kilometers from where their bodies were found. It was clear the mother and her daughters were just on a simple vacation. But a big question started forming in the investigators' minds. Why were they traveling alone? And where was the father? Detectives eventually reached Hal Rogers, Joan's husband, and the father of Michelle and Christ. Hal ran a small dairy farm with his family back in Ohio, the kind of place that eats up every minute of your day. Chickens, cows, milking, cleaning, endless work that never takes a break. A farm like that can't be left alone, not even for a single day. Because of those responsibilities, and because the family couldn't afford hired workers, Hal couldn't join them on the trip. So when Joan and the girls wanted a short getaway, a simple change of scenery, he had no choice but to stay behind and take care of the farm. That's how Joan, Michelle, and Christ ended up traveling alone. But the shock wasn't in their trip. It was in Hal's reaction later. They were supposed to come back home on June 1st. That was the date they'd agreed on. A day passed, then another, then another. No sign of them. And strangely, Hal didn't call anyone. He didn't alert the police. He didn't even ask around. Normally, any father, any person in his position, would start to panic the same day. They'd probably go to the police the next morning at the latest. But Hal didn't move. In the end, he wasn't the one who called the police. The police were the ones who called him and told him what happened. His reaction stunned the investigators, because when he received the news, he didn't break down. He didn't sound shocked. He didn't even pause. He just said one sentence. "I don't have time to be emotional right now. I've got a farm to run." And then he went right back to work, like nothing had happened. That reaction immediately raised red flags. Any normal father would have collapsed, or at the very least shown signs of disbelief. How could a man hear that his wife and his 2 young daughters were murdered in such a brutal way and feel nothing? Even if his relationship with his wife was strained. Michelle was just 17, Christ was 14, 2 little girls. A killer had kidnapped them, assaulted them, tied concrete blocks to their feet, and drowned them alive. And still, no grief, not even a tremble in his voice. Because of that, Hal instantly became a prime suspect, and in most family-related murders, the first suspects are always the relatives. A lot of people hearing this story probably thought the same thing. The dad did it, but the investigation proved the exact opposite. After digging deeper, detectives confirmed Hal never left his hometown during the entire time of the murders. His town in Ohio was over 1,500 kilometers away from Florida, and driving there and back would take at least 2 full days. On top of that, the town was tiny. Only a few hundred people. Everyone knew everyone. Hal went out every day to eat at the town's small restaurant, because he didn't know how to cook. Joan always cooked for him. He also visited the local market regularly. Dozens of witnesses confirmed seeing him every single day during the days the murders took place. That completely cleared him. As for his strange, cold reaction, some specialists tried to explain it later. They said it might have been his way of coping with shock, drowning himself in work, holding on to routine, refusing to feel anything, because the reality was simply too big, too painful, too overwhelming. But even with that explanation, something still feels off. Even today, when Hal appears in interviews, he seems calm, steady, almost emotionless. And sometimes, he even smiles while talking about his wife and daughters. A smile no one understands. A smile that leaves people uneasy. But this story wasn't about Hal. It was about a killer still hiding in the shadows. And the police were about to begin a search far more complicated and far stranger than anyone expected. Now, leaving the father behind, let's go back to the heart of the crime itself. When the forensic experts began examining the bodies, their job was almost impossible. 3 full days in open water were enough to erase almost everything. No fingerprints, no hair, no DNA. Every clue that could have saved this case had been washed away completely. But the police didn't stop. They knew the mother had a car, so they started searching for it. And after sweeping the area, they found it. Parked near a tiny marina, more like a temporary spot for boats than a real port. No registration, no docks, no supervision. Anyone with a boat could pull up, stay a few minutes, then disappear into the water. Finding the car there gave investigators their first real lead. Joan and her daughters got on a boat from this exact place, and a boat like that most likely belonged to the killer himself. The police searched the car carefully, and that's when they found the first real shock. The 2 notes. Inside the car, detectives found 2 handwritten pieces of paper, and each one was written in completely different handwriting, meaning 2 different people wrote them. The first note, written by the mother. It had directions to reach that marina, the same exact spot where the car was found. At the bottom of the note, she wrote 2 strange words, blue and white. Investigators knew they were looking for a boat. So what at that marina could possibly be blue and white? The only logical answer, the boat itself. The second note, written by a stranger. This one was far more interesting. It included a rough map and directions to the hotel where the family was staying. But the handwriting, it was odd. Extremely odd. In the name Courtney, for example, the letter T in the middle of the word was written as a capital letter, something almost no one does. And even stranger, the letter Y. It appeared 4 times in the note, and each time it looked different. Different angle, different curve, different pressure. Almost as if the writer's hand wasn't steady or had a strange, unnatural writing style. This made the note look like a handwriting fingerprint, something detectives could easily recognize later if they ever found the writer. Since the 2 notes were the only real evidence, the police focused everything on them. The blue and white clue leads to the first suspect. After hours of digging, the police got a call from a local resident. He told them there was a man who ran an illegal side business, taking tourists on sunset boat rides, and he used the same exact spot where the victim's car was found. His name was Jason Wilcox, and the important part? He owned a blue and white boat. Detectives started digging into him, and the story got even more interesting. He had a criminal record. He'd been in jail before, for physical assault, and he lived just 8 kilometers away from where the victim's car was discovered. So police went straight to his house, and the shock continued. His boat was right there in the yard, and beside it were concrete blocks identical to the ones tied to the victim's feet. But Jason denied everything. And with no physical evidence connecting him to the murders, no DNA, no witnesses, no fingerprints, the police couldn't arrest him. They couldn't even legally ask for a handwriting sample to match it with the mysterious note. Still, they didn't let him go. They started watching him quietly, step by step, because everything around him screamed that this man was the closest thing they had to the truth. But what the police didn't know was that the road to the real killer would come from a direction no one expected, and in a way no one could have imagined. During the investigation, which was growing bigger day after day, a brand new lead suddenly appeared, and it flipped the entire case upside down. The crime had become the talk of the town. Pictures of the victims spread everywhere. Newspapers, TV, radio, and giant billboards went up offering a $25,000 reward for any clue that could crack the mystery. And with all that attention, the police station started receiving a flood of calls. Tips, rumors, guesses, most of them useless, vague stories that led nowhere. But in the middle of all that noise, one call stood out. A Canadian tourist named Judy Blair. Her face wasn't on the news, but the moment she started talking, every detective in the room went silent. She reported an assault that happened to her on a boat, an incident that took place just 2 weeks before Joan and her daughters were murdered, and the details were terrifying and almost identical. Judy said she'd come to Florida on vacation with a friend. One day, while they were walking near the shoreline, a man approached them. He seemed gentle, calm, polite. He offered them a sunset boat ride, a peaceful trip during the golden hour. Her friend refused immediately. But Judy? She loved the idea. A sunset in the middle of the ocean. Quiet waves. A beautiful moment she'd remember forever. And back then, she didn't think twice. It was a different time, before the internet, before true crime stories spread everywhere, before the world learned how monsters sometimes hide behind friendly faces. So she agreed. She got on the boat with him. But the moment the boat drifted far from the shore, far enough that no one could hear her scream, everything changed. The man pulled out a knife and pressed it against her neck. He leaned in and whispered in a cold, flat voice, "Don't even think about running. The ocean's full of sharks." Judy froze. Terror took over her whole body. She begged him not to hurt her. She pleaded. But it didn't stop him. The assault happened, and afterward, she collapsed in a corner of the boat, shaking, crying, covering her face with her hands, just waiting for the nightmare to end. He waited until it was completely dark, then finally turned the boat back toward shore. But when they got close to land, he didn't dock the boat. He didn't help her out. Instead, he ordered her to jump into the water and swim all the way to the beach. And later, investigators would realize why. This wasn't random. It wasn't messy. It was calculated. He wanted to erase every trace of evidence, every hair, every fiber, every drop of DNA, washed away by the sea. And Judy, without knowing, finished the job. When she made it back to her hotel, exhausted, traumatized, shaking, the first thing she did was take a shower before going to the police. And that shower erased the very last thing that could have helped the investigation. So the police had almost nothing to work with. The only thing she could give them was a description of the man. A forensic artist created a sketch, and it looked disturbingly accurate, but still not enough to arrest anyone. Days went by, and just 2 weeks later, the brutal murders of Joan and her daughters took place. When the news broke, and Judy heard that a blue and white boat was seen near the crime scene, she came running back to the police. With absolute certainty, she said, "That's him. That's the same man who attacked me. I'll never forget that boat." For the detectives, everything clicked. They were now convinced, completely, that the same man who assaulted Judy was the monster behind the triple homicide. Now, the Canadian tourist had become the key witness in the entire case. She was the only person who had seen the killer's face clearly. So the very first thing the detectives did was show her a photo of Jason Walcatch, the man they'd suspected from the beginning. But the moment her eyes landed on his picture, she shook her head with complete certainty. "No, that's not the man who attacked me." And when they compared Jason's face to the police sketch, the difference was obvious. His features didn't match the attacker at all. Still, the police brought Jason in. They put him through a lie detector test, and he passed without hesitation. On top of that, he had a rock-solid alibi. Multiple people confirmed he was with them on the day of the murders. And just like that, Jason Walcatch was officially removed from the suspect list. But the sketch of the killer created massive buzz. A huge wave of calls started pouring in. People claiming they recognized the face. And the blue and white boat situation made things even crazier, since that color combination was extremely common in the area. Imagine the amount of reports hitting the police every single day. Phone calls, tips, assumptions, each one needing follow-up. The workload was so overwhelming that some tips were checked quickly, and some were accidentally ignored. And the shocking part? One of the ignored tips was actually right. The killer's own neighbor had recognized the sketch and called the police to report his suspicions. But what happened next was never fully clear. Maybe the detectives didn't dig deep because they were drowning in calls. Or maybe they did a quick check and dismissed him without realizing that the real murderer was right in front of them. Just imagine it. The man they were looking for was among them, close enough to touch. Yet he slipped right through their fingers. Because of these mistakes, the killer stayed free for 3 whole years. 3 years with the case frozen, no answers, no breakthroughs, even though the truth had been sitting there from the very beginning. Now we jump to 1992. The case was still open, just not active anymore. But every now and then, a small tip would still trickle in. And then, out of nowhere, one detective had an idea. A strange idea. Unusual. Something no one had ever tried before. But maybe it was the only option left. You see, the police had found a handwritten note inside the mother's car. Directions to the hotel, written by the killer himself. And the handwriting was unique. Very unique. So the detective said, "Why don't we publish it? Why not let the public see the handwriting? Maybe someone out there will recognize it." And that's exactly what they did. The police put up 5 huge billboards around the city, each one printed with the message, "Who wrote these directions? Do you recognize this handwriting? Reward, $25,000. And at the bottom, the police department's phone number. For the first time ever, the killer's handwriting was displayed publicly for thousands of people to see. It was bold. It was strange. It was completely new in the world of criminal investigations. And the wildest part? It actually worked. A woman named Joanne Steffi, and ironically, she shared the same first name as the murdered mother, was walking down the street when she saw one of the billboards. She stopped, stared at it, then gasped. She recognized the handwriting instantly. She called the police and said, "This handwriting belongs to a man who used to work in my house. I still have invoices he wrote. Come get them." The detectives rushed to her home. She explained that she had hired a man who worked in aluminum, and from day one something felt off about him. He acted strange. He lied a lot. He always seemed like he was hiding something. She handed over the invoices she'd saved, and the moment the handwriting expert saw them, the case was solved. One single look, and she confirmed the match. Perfectly. The capital T in the middle of words. The weird shapes of the Y. Every tiny detail was identical. The man who wrote those invoices was the same man who wrote the hotel directions. The police moved immediately and arrested him. And when they placed his photo next to the sketch drawn from Judy's description, the resemblance was shocking. Finally, after 3 long years, the real killer had a face. Oba Chandler. The man whose identity stayed a mystery for years, finally surfaced. He was 43 at the time, married, and unbelievably, he had 8 children from 7 different women. He ran a small aluminum contracting business, building kitchens, doors, and doing home installations like any normal handyman. At least, on the outside. But behind that mask, there was a very dark past. His criminal record went all the way back to his teenage years, including 2 sexual assaults on women, which landed him in prison for several years. And on top of that, he owned a blue and white boat, the exact same colors mentioned in every earlier report. One of the strongest pieces of evidence pointing straight at him came from the boat-to-shore radio logs, a system that records every call made from any boat to the Coast Guard or Marine Dispatch. And those logs proved that Chandler's boat was out at sea at the exact time the murders happened. Even worse, right after the crime, he called his wife and told her he was having boat problems and would be late coming home. A tiny lie. But it exposed everything. Of course, Oba Chandler denied all of it, claimed he was innocent. But the police had one witness they couldn't ignore: the Canadian girl who survived him by pure luck. They showed her his photo among a group of pictures, just to avoid bias. And the moment she saw his face, she pointed at him instantly, absolutely certain he was the man who attacked her. Her expression shifted, fear, disgust, like the memory hit her all over again. To be sure, detectives brought Chandler in for a physical lineup, a live identification test. And when she saw him standing there, in person, she pointed at him again. No hesitation. Same face, same eyes, same terror. After that, investigators went to search Oba Chandler's boat. But the surprise was he had sold it, and he sold it just 3 months after the murders. That boat vanished almost immediately after the crime. That wasn't coincidence. He had destroyed the main crime scene. Even with all that, the police wanted more. Something airtight. Something no defense could escape. So they went back to the paper found inside the mother's car, the one with the handwritten hotel directions. They found several fingerprints on it, most belonging to the mother and her daughters. But on the page, clear as daylight, was a full palm print. Not a small fingerprint. A full palm. As if the man had pressed his entire hand against the paper while writing. When experts compared that palm print with Oba Chandler's, it was a perfect match. There was no doubt left. The handwriting? His. The palm print? His. Presence at sea? Proven. The blue and white boat? His. Every thread pulled straight toward him, undeniably. Chandler stood in court, and even with the evidence stacked against him, he kept insisting he was innocent. But when the case reached the critical point, the paper with his handwriting and palm print, he tried to dodge it with a brand new story. He told the court he met Joanne and her daughters at a gas station, said the mother was lost and asked for directions. So he took her paper, wrote the directions to the hotel, handed it back, and left. According to him, that was the entire interaction. Detectives didn't buy a single word. It was nothing but a desperate excuse to explain why his handwriting and his palm were on the paper. They believed the truth was far uglier. After writing the directions, he probably played friendly, pretending to help, pretending to be a kind man. Then he told them he sometimes took tourists out on sunset boat rides, that the view was beautiful out in the open water. And the daughters, excited and innocent, might have convinced their mother to go. Most likely. The mother wrote the marina location on the paper herself and added blue and white to remember the boat's color. They met him at the marina just before sunset and went out onto the water with him. And once they reached deep sea, far from anyone's eyes, Oba Chandler pulled a knife, threatened them, cornered them in the middle of the ocean, with no swimming skills, no help, no escape. He tied them with the yellow rope, assaulted them, then tied concrete blocks to their feet, and threw them into the water while they were still alive. He didn't kill them first. He let them drown, fully conscious, fully aware. Even the mother, the last one he threw, watched her daughters sink in front of her. Why did he do this? Why so brutally? Why with such coldness? It was the question that haunted every single person who worked on the case. The answer came from one of the witnesses the prosecution called to the stand during the trial. And this witness wasn't just some random person. He was an inmate, a man who shared a cell block with Oba Chandler after the police arrested him. And as everyone knows, prisoners talk. especially when a criminal feels like he finally found his people. Apparently, Oba felt comfortable around them. They were criminals, just like him. So he started bragging, almost showing off his dark history like it was something to be proud of. He told his cellmate horrifying details, including that he once assaulted a foreign woman on a boat out at sea, which of course was the Canadian victim. But he didn't stop there. He said he also assaulted 2 girls and their mother in the middle of the ocean. Then added something even darker. He said he wouldn't be sitting in that jail cell if one of the girls hadn't fought back. That statement hit the courtroom like a shockwave because it gave a chilling explanation, a very believable motive for why the murders happened. Resistance. Maybe. If one of those girls hadn't tried to fight him, he would have let them go, just like he let the Canadian victim go years before. The cellmate's testimony carried a lot of weight, but it wasn't the only testimony that pushed the case forward. More witnesses stepped up, including one of Oba Chandler's own daughters and her husband. They revealed that Oba had shown up at their home unexpectedly, terrified, telling them he was trying to hide from the police because they were looking for him. And there was more. After the murders, Oba didn't just sell his boat. He also moved his entire family to another area. The case was all over the news, and the suspect's sketch was everywhere. He knew the walls were closing in when the prosecution finally finished laying out all the evidence, and the judge and jury listened to every testimony. The jury stepped out to deliberate. 90 minutes later, they came back with one decision, clear, final, and impossible to undo. Oba Chandler, guilty. And with that verdict, the judge delivered the final sentence, death. But the execution didn't happen right away. Oba stayed on death row for many years. Part of the delay was the state wanting absolute certainty, making sure no new evidence appeared, especially since Oba kept insisting he was innocent until the very end. And another reason, Florida was changing its execution methods. The electric chair was officially discontinued in 2000, which caused even more delays. Finally, after years of waiting, a date was set. November 15th, 2011, on that day, Oba Chandler was executed by lethal injection. And before he died, he wrote one last message. Today, you are executing an innocent man. That was the end of Oba Chandler's life, but his crimes remained, a permanent reminder of the horror he caused, and his case continued to haunt the state of Florida for decades. What's even stranger is that Oba Chandler's criminal record didn't end with the horror we just talked about. In fact, years later, investigators uncovered something even darker. In 2015, 4 years after his execution, another case suddenly resurfaced. It went all the way back to 1990, when a young girl was found dead on the side of a road after suffering a brutal assault. At the time the case went cold, there just wasn't enough evidence, but by 2015, forensic science had advanced. DNA technology had become incredibly precise, so the case was reopened and the evidence was tested again. And this time, everything changed. The DNA found on the girl's body matched Oba Chandler perfectly. After that match, investigators became convinced that Oba wasn't just a murderer. He was very likely a serial killer, a man responsible for more crimes, many of which were never solved or were written off as unknown offender cases. And with that, we reach the end of our story. A dark journey, filled with chilling details that reveal the mind of a manipulative, calculated criminal, and the relentless efforts of investigators who fought to bring justice no matter how long it took. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to support us with a like and subscribe. We've got more shocking, gripping stories coming your way, like the tale of the author who committed a brutal murder and documented every detail in his own novel. And of course, the story of the infamous Ted Bundy. But this time, told with new angles and details you've never heard before. See you in the next story.